of this section is Yurij Holovatch, who is one of the main organizers of all the MECO meetings, and he's very active in the advisory board, and he was the one who encouraged us all the time and telling us that, okay, everything is going fine. So we are very thankful for him. And somehow Lviv and Cluj, or Lemberg and Klausenburg, has very similar histories in many senses. We were both part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, so we can share a lot of also cultural things in common. So Yuri, you're the chief. Take it over.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Zoltan. You know, indeed, when I was watching this presentation about Transylvania, I thought about Galiciana, which is Galician in German, and indeed we were in the same country, showing that MECO conference occurs in the proper place. So I have the honor and pleasure to open the last session, and also I am sad, as we all are, that it is the last session of this meeting. And we will have 2 invited talks and 2 contributed talks. The first talk will be given by Ágnes Horvát from Northwestern University in the United States. And the title is The Science of Sharing and the Sharing of Science. Please, Annette, you are welcome.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the invitation and the kind introduction. The conference is organized by my alma mater, by people who are very close to my heart. So it's truly an honor and very exciting talk to give. And it's going to be close to home. So it's
just one short note that you're again double sharing the transparencies. So go on and sorry for interrupting you, but it's
no worries. How about this?
Not yet. We had you experienced the same problem when you tried. Remember, we had 2
yes.
of them, and then you did something.
Let me do this again.
Yes, please.
Okay, so now
I see the first one and the next slide, and then you did something, and by miracle, it was just 1.
Okay, what's going on?
Select the duplicate. There were 2 options there, Ágnes. It was also the duplicate select possibility, and that was working fine. If you go up there where you were first time, okay, and duplicate the slideshow, and then it should be okay. The second option, second option, we see it. There were 2 options up there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it drops me out when I click on the second one, though. Give me 1 second. No problem.
You can continue like that. We don't mind.
So it seemed simpler before. So are you seeing now the transparencies both, or?
Now a little bit worse, because we see on the left part of the screen many transparencies and 1 large on the right part of the screen.
Uh-huh.
Now it's
perfect. Good.
Perfect.
Okay.
Good.
Give me 1 minute here. Okay. So thank you again for the invitation. This will be yet another relaxing talk, hopefully. And the idea is to talk to you about something that's probably close to home, and that's called scholarly communication. This is a fancy word just to say when any of you in the audience as scholars are sharing something about your work, either on Twitter or on Facebook or on YouTube or any of the social media platforms that you can think of. And this is something that has been intriguing to me, especially because as a millennial, I'm probably the last person in this cohort to not be on any of these social platforms. And when you talk to colleagues, they do advise that you use this for promotion of your work and your papers, as long as you stay away from politics. And if you look at research, how should and could this be done, scholarly communication that is effective, then you realize that there's actually very little actual data on this. And there's also very little advice beyond the anecdotal things that you might be hearing. So a couple of years ago with a student, we thought that we could quantify this. We could do this better and figure out what are some of the good ways to promote yourself online, what tends to work. And so I'm going to present to you today the first poke at this problem that we made, and I'm going to walk you through, first of all, some of the results, some of the descriptives, some of the models that we use to try and describe how people share science online and what tends to be shared more often. But then also sprinkled into that, I will try to give you some ideas about how you could approach this better for your own research. And then at the third layer, I will be showing to those of you who are interested in networks, a few network-related network diffusion models that you might find interesting, with an interesting twist in the sense that we'll try to expand those to multiple platforms. So this will not be the traditional, hey, we got some data from Twitter and we are modeling something within this one framework, but we'll try to expand that to a crucial, more holistic setting. So the actual observations reported in research that motivated some of this work is that 75 to 80% of researchers are using social media for the dissemination of their work or promotion of their work. This is a quite high number. And that on the other side, the internet has also become one of the most widely used sources of science information for the wide public. So it is something that people are extensively using these days. So it's worth looking into the context. The context is quite grim, actually, because as some of you will know, there's a growing distrust with the academic enterprise. Science journalism is under-resourced and scientific literacy is low across the globe. So the question becomes then, if people are talking about science and we have the ability to trace that data, then could we do better in terms of improving scholarly communication in a way that serves better both researchers and society at large? And with this work, we will be focusing actually on the spreading networks, the sharing networks. So if we go back to, again, what has been done before, then the most relevant piece that I wanted to point out today is a survey-based research piece from PNAS that has looked at what people has contacted basically authors who have had their papers in very highly ranked journals, has asked them to write a summary of their work, and then they gave those surveys to a bunch of experimental subjects and asked them to rate on a scale from 1 to 5 how likely they would be to share that specific piece. And this research has given us quite a few insights into what might be deemed to be shareable by broad audiences. So first of all, the content matters. So if someone is talking about an interesting, timely, and relatable research question, then that has higher chances of being published. There are interesting trends in terms of scientific fields. So things related to, unsurprisingly, to psychology, some medical sciences, business are much more shareable than things in genetics and biochemistry or physics. So there's certainly a topic-based effect there. There are also patterns in who you're more likely to share scientific results. But what this study leaves as an unknown, as a major unknown, is how do people disseminate research findings in real settings? So the question there is, what's the difference between showing subjects 1 or 2 summaries and asking them in a lab setting, and how does this happen in the wild? In the wild, we know that there are, first of all, so many things competing for our attention, so we will never be able to focus on one key idea and spend a lot of time thinking about, oh, is this worth sharing or not? The least of the people do that based on research. And then there's also an interesting question around platforms. So there are so many platforms that we are using. We know that people don't select randomly into these platforms. So basically the question is, how does then sharing happen in the wild? And as I mentioned in the intro, we'll make sure to try to have a byproduct to this analysis that will speak to you in terms of how to reach broader audiences with your research. Okay, so let me acknowledge my co-author, my student, Igor Zaklebin, with whom we published this paper earlier this year. And the main enabler of this large-scale study on diffusion patterns on social media and beyond was that we could access data from a company called Altmetric. I don't know whether anyone here is familiar with them. You might have seen the little colorful donut on your papers and some of the platforms. So what this company does is that they have been tracking for the past 10 years, I would say, scientific articles that popped up on social media, starting with Twitter to Facebook, Reddit, and so on, in the news, on some policy documents, even websites, on Wikipedia, and so on. And the big enabler of this is actually the DOI and some of the hyperlinks that contain DOIs. So that's the document identifier, the unique document identifier for papers. So it tends to work really well. And we are very grateful that we didn't have to do the data collection. So a lot of the work in prior work in studying diffusion on networks has been either theoretical or simulation-based, or has tried to validate the models on one platform alone, or maybe two. I'll show you some examples for that as well. So just to give you a feeling for how Altmetric data looks like, I'm showing you one example. This is a random example. You'll see the fact that there's a bunch of data collected by this company. They are looking at metadata about the papers, and then really the actual mentions in the news, on blogs, in policy documents, and so on. So when we receive this data from Altmetric, then we first looked into the extent of it, and I'm happy to share that there are some, so this data seems to be as comprehensible as something like this could be at this scale. So we have data across 7 years, many disciplines and publication venues are covered here. So from agricultural sciences to biological sciences, physics, engineering, computer science, and so on. And you'll see that the clear dominating platform is Twitter here, based on the number of posts and users, but there's a bunch of non-trivial discussion about scientific articles going on some of these other platforms. So I like to do one other voting here, which is probably just going to be a thought experiment given the format now, but just to train your intuition on how this looks like, I'm showing you the trajectories of mentions. So here you are seeing time and just the number of mentions on different platforms for 2 articles. One out of these articles, one of these is Barack Obama's article, scientific article paper on the healthcare reform. So I will give you 20 seconds maybe to make a guess about whether the left one or the right one could be the article published by Barack Obama. Okay, so probably you are looking now at social media representation, you are looking at the news, you are looking at blogs, and hopefully you've made your guess here. So I'm going to reveal that the one on your right side is the paper published by Barack Obama, or the reaction to the paper published by Barack Obama. But it's interesting to note that the paper that I'm using for comparison, Primary Prevention of Cardiovascular Disease with a Mediterranean Diet, is a paper that has been later retracted, and yet it had quite a bit of social media attention, not so much in the news. So just after we've talked about this, and you have a better sense for what the trends might be like, I'm just going to walk you through a discussion basically of some of the temporal trends that we see at the beginning, and then we'll move on to look at how one might infer a network, a sharing network based on these time series data. So the very first thing relates to the key idea behind this, that we want to move away from discussing about one platform and trying to make generalized conclusions. And what you are seeing here is just an acknowledgement of the thought process that went into developing approaches to investigate this multi-platform setting. So prior research has focused on sole platforms and maybe in some occasions on pairs of platforms, but that's pretty much what we know about diffusion so far. So when we managed to extend this to more data and carefully adapted all the methods, then we could have a more informed answer to the question. The first one, for example, that looked at how sharing of scientific findings was similar to the spreading of other types of content that people have looked at before, in particular news, memes, photos, and video. And the three pieces of analysis that were most informative: the first one, just temporal variations in spreading. So much like news pieces, news articles, whenever someone starts to promote an article, the first 3 days are the ones that will have the most activity, and the interest is, and the activity, the sharing activity is fading after that. I'll talk a little bit more about burstiness, and the speed of content adoption across platforms is also interesting. We see that Twitter is just faster than the news, and this resembles what people have seen when studying memes. So regarding the burstiness, I think this is the first piece that will give hope to some of you, just like it did to us. So we do see that one can identify bursts across various platforms. So there are clearly some spikes in mentions, and interestingly, these bursts recur. So they are obviously smaller and after longer time frames as time passes, but there's still hope for, we would say, for some of the papers that have not received a ton of attention at the beginning. Maybe they accumulate more attention later. It's not unheard of. Okay, so what are the characteristics now of sharing scientific knowledge? So these temporal analyses, descriptives, gave us a sense for how this happens at scale, at the aggregate level. And now we were thinking how to get at the actual sharing network based on the time series of mentions that I've been showing you before. And to infer this network, I'm going to just try and walk you through the main steps of the approach that we use. So think about this. There's one person who's tweeting now about their first article, and this gets then at, say, 3 other people. One of them might decide to pass it on and share it further, and the others might not decide to do that. So there's an inherent diffusion network that underpins this process that we are actually not observing. What we are observing instead is who posted what, so which paper and when. So we are looking at the time series of posts. And then the question is, how would one get from that to the actual sharing network? So meaning who posted as a reaction to whose post. And this will be a network inference. It will have some uncertainties, but the likely structure will be something that we identify with an efficient inference algorithm. At this scale, it was important to use greedy optimization, for instance. And the basic heuristic that I want to convey, so that if you ever have to just look at time series data and infer a network, whether it's an influence network or a sharing network based on that, the basic heuristic that seems to be extremely robust is that one can say that the more often user A in this little chart, to explain it better, posted shortly before user B, the more likely that there is a link between A and B. So there's a probabilistic component to this. It doesn't mean that we only create a link if B always posted after A, but the key idea is that the time difference between these 2 posts will be essential. So that's the basic heuristic. And so if we saw the main idea based on just 2 individuals on 2 platforms, then it's quite straightforward to extend this to multiple users, multiple platforms. So here, if you can think about this as, again, in terms of the unknown diffusion network, so who hears what, that's something that we are not observing, but we are observing the posting activity. So here with the straight red arrows, then one can infer the sharing network, and that will be the red dashed arrows shown in this example. Okay, now let's evaluate this. So it's a simple idea. It works at this scale, so that's great, but how good is it? And to create a baseline for this and to have a sense for how well we are doing, we used real social influence data from Twitter and Facebook. So on those platforms, if you go back to the platforms and look up the users, then you can see some friendship and follower relationships that can represent the gold standard for how the influence is very likely to happen. So when we test the methods that I just presented to you and on these platforms and compare it with random and naive baseline, so the random baseline is just placing randomly these influence relationships. Naive baseline is just take the most, basically take all the connections that are possible due to the temporal sequence of sharings. Then if you have these two very simple baselines, then you see that basically NetInf, our algorithm, is doing substantially better than those. So these very simple naive baselines are unsurprisingly not going to capture the actual influence structure. Instead, we are doing much better. The algorithm is doing much better. Now, could it do also even better? So you might say, hey, well, how about extending this heuristic beyond just what are the frequently happening sharings, happening posts, one after the other. So how about extending it with some information about the content of posts? So if someone is using the same words in their post, or if they are referring to the same hyperlinks, would that improve the accuracy of this algorithm? And we played around quite a bit with that and had to establish that actually the big driver here is the temporal component. So the algorithm with the additional information turned out to be unnecessarily complex. It just gave us a teeny tiny boost on accuracy. So we are running with NetInf based on the temporal heuristic, and we are quite confident that this is the right level of complexity here. So what can one do after deducing from the time series of posts the likely sharing relationships? So based on this inferred network, we can answer a bunch of questions. I'm not going to go into details. I have additional slides. I want to be mindful of the time. So if you are interested in who are the main spreaders of scientific articles and what platforms are they using, then I have some interesting results about which users might matter most on Twitter, for instance, or in the news. Nature News, for instance, is the place. If you can get anything covered by them, then that's giving you, of course, a much higher visibility than anything else. There are some very active bloggers about science who can get you quite far. So if you are interested, I'm happy to show you later some plots about that. We also asked the question, at what rates does information propagate between platforms? So we see, since we are interested in this question of cross-platform information sharing, we see obviously that according to this model too, most of the information sharing happens within a single platform, but there are some interesting and surprising sharing, say, between Facebook and Twitter. A lot of what's happening on Twitter is transmitted on Twitter. is originating in Facebook or on Reddit. So there's a lot of interesting cross-platform trends that previous studies have just not been able to incorporate in their work. Now, the last one that I'm going to try and spend a little bit more time on is how does the structural virality of propagation trees vary by the platform sharing the article first? And if you are not familiar with this literature, you'll be like, what? So what's structural virality? And the idea is quite simple. So when one tries to talk about sharing, quantifying the spread of an article, or prior literature has looked at the sharing of tweets, the sharing of images in tweets, in Facebook posts, then people have distinguished between two main types of sharing. One of them is the broadcast setting, where there is one traditionally I don't know, a TV channel, but now one influencer in the social media world who is transmitting then the information to several people. But then there's the person-to-person sharing, which is actually on the other end of the spectrum. Obviously, most sharing happens, this is a continuum, most sharing will be between these two extremes. But the person-to-person sharing, this is the word of mouth that so many in viral campaign management want to get at, so that people are just inherently talking about your product, about your research in this case. So in this case, the differences, the average distances between trees, nodes in the tree will be much larger. So basically, the structural virality quantifies the average distance between two nodes in these propagation trees. And the higher it is, the more likely that this propagation tree hasn't stopped at you having shared your article to, say, 10 people, but it has gone beyond that. So when we look at the structural virality in this setting across the entire sample that we are looking at, then we see that it does depend on the platform where the initial post happened. And the big takeaway from here, as you will see, based on the numbers that we have for news, is that if you can get some press attention for your paper, if you are submitting press releases and some journals, magazines react to that, then you are of course ahead of the game. The structural virality then is much higher than in the social media case, the pure social media based sharing case. Now, also, there's an important distinction between what an individual can do, even in this setting, and what institutions, organizations can do. And when we painstakingly differentiated accounts based on whether they were organizations or individuals, we saw that there is certainly a strong payoff to having an organization send out some sort of promotional material to your work. So organizations tend to produce more structurally viral cascades than individuals. And this figure is also interesting if you are wondering still about what's the idea behind the Wiener index or the structural virality, then you'll see here, based on the examples, that what you ideally would like is a chain of propagations where more people and more institutions, more importantly, more organizations are involved. Okay, so just to sum up what I have shown you, I've provided you a comprehensive temporal analysis of the sharing network of scientific articles online. We've looked at various platforms. This is a big novelty in comparison to pretty much all the existing studies in focusing on sharing of science. We developed a framework to study multi-platform dissemination, and for that we adapted some of the literature that's out there to try and understand in a more holistic way and at the scale that nobody has looked at before how science is shared. We explored the likely structure of sharing networks across platforms. This is also quite new. And along the way, we've made some observations about what might work more. So the main takeaways, if you are in for, okay, how do I improve my promotional efforts? Getting on Wikipedia is fantastic. It pays off tremendously. As mentioned, having press releases for your work and formulating those in a very accessible language will give you a head start in this game. And we believe in work that we are doing in parallel to this. We believe that there is a link between visibility on social media and traditional indicators of success, like citation numbers in particular. So this is a highly contested correlation, but we are learning more and more about that, and I'm excited to provide more on that at a later occasion. This project has, as I mentioned at the beginning, started out as a hobby project out of curiosity and just wanting to get a better understanding of the value of tweeting about your research. It has grown into an NSF Career Award earlier this year. So we are asking now various other questions. We are working on models that predict people's reactions from early coverage patterns. So what's going to be the reaction given that you had just a few mentions on this or that social media platform? We are exploring the effect of information distortion on sharing science. This is a crucial piece when it comes to understanding cross-platform patterns, because obviously tweets are just so different from news articles. The information that you can share there is much more limited, and it's very interesting to see how the information is changing as it goes through these steps in the sharing patterns. We are building computational tools for science journalists. It turns out that, as I indicated to you with the example shown at the beginning, some of the later retracted papers are also receiving quite a bit of attention, and we believe that there are some non-trivial differences in the way they are marketed. So we are hoping that as this work progresses, we can predict some of those subsequently retracted papers based on the sharing patterns, which would be hugely valuable for science journalists. I'm not sure whether you are familiar with this practice, but since they want new articles, they are always focused on archive. Those are publishing papers that have not gone under peer review. So there's a lot of reporting based on papers that nobody has assessed, basically. So they are in desperate need of better tools to assess what's newsworthy and what's reliable. And then we are also working on illuminating inequalities in the coverage of scholarship. So this will not be any news for anyone in the room that there are significant differences when it comes to academic success based on affiliation, based on geography, based on age, all sorts of demographics, and we are really interested in seeing how these differences known from offline settings in terms of citations, in terms of promotion success, translate into the online setting, which should be more transparent and more egalitarian. Okay, so with that, I'm going to close off and just open it up for questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Agnes. Very, very nice talk. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Also, thank you for sparing some time. We have 6 minutes for discussion. Using the chance to give you a question, maybe I start. You mentioned this fact, but I want to ask in more details. So I can judge about merit of my paper when it is cited in the scientific papers, scientific journals. Then my paper appears in social media. How could you judge that my next citation in PhysRel is caused by discussion on Twitter?
Mm-hmm. So
I have the chicken egg dilemma. What was the first? What was the next?
So certainly this is a complicated issue, right? Because if you start to transfer knowledge from one paper to the other, then at that point you are making inferences about how the how your first paper has done and what was visible to your audiences from that. What we see is that when we run these models at the paper level and we include as variables, as factors, your prior productivity, for instance, or the prior H-index, the prior impact factors of journals that you've used, then these are all important signals in saying, on the one hand, how much promotion you will get online, and then in a later step, and that relationship is still tricky, how many citations the paper that we are talking about is going to get, not your other papers, later papers.
Thank you. Other questions, please. Questions?
Yeah, I would have one for Agnes. I know that you have a PhD in physics and also a degree in communication science. So as having, let's say, a background from both directions, do you still believe in collective intelligence and filtering possibility of social networks in science? Because nowadays, I think one of the biggest problems we are facing is this pseudo-scientific news, which are spreading as fast also as the real scientific ones. So and many other people are questioning seriously whether the social networking, in fact, helps us in filtering efficiently the information or not. So can you comment a little bit on it?
Gladly. So this is something that I'm thinking about quite a bit. And the reason I'm probably more optimistic than the community is because we do look at the data. So we at large scale, and we do see the good discussion in this data about science. The problem is that this good discussion reaches far smaller audiences than all the overhyped, clickbaity titled pseudoscience and overly marketed science. The one that tends to get retracted in a few years. So I think that this is a huge problem. I do think that the scientific community is invested in talking more in a good way about science. There are incredibly interesting discussions, but that these need to be scaled up in a meaningful way. And I don't expect the scientific community to be doing this organically. So this is why I think that the computational tools and the filtering tools that we might be able to develop could help quite a bit with this process. So I don't see organically the good lame science, in the sense that it's not overhyped, taking the stage. So instead, obviously, it will be so much easier for people to mindlessly share the same things about curing cancer and about the usual suspects. So I think that if we provide science journalists better and more informed tools about how to identify some of those overhyped things, then overall we will have done quite improved the discourse about science.
We have time for one more short question.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any? If not, let us thank the speaker again.
I thank you.
Sorry? Hello? Okay. So let us thank the speaker again, and we pass to the next talk. It will be given by José Luis Ricardo from National University of St. Louis in Argentina. It will be about adsorption statistics of structured molecules. You are welcome, José. Please share.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to share the whole screen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very thankful to the organizing committee for giving us and giving me the opportunity to address this talk. We are very glad from our group in Argentina to meet the community of statistical physics of the MECO community. So I want to present my co-workers, our colleague for a long time, José Ramirez-Pastor, Pedro Pacinetti, and Julian Ricardo, who had collaborated with this work as well. All of them from the University, National University of San Luis Institute of Applied Physics in CONICET. I want to, well, the title of the talk is Absorption and Statistic of Structural Particles. We want to address the problem. Even we talk about absorption, the underlying problem that we are addressing is the problem of particles on the lattice. Particles which has a structure, a complex structure sometimes, which are not simple particles. This is a fundamental problem of classical statistical mechanics, and that can be applied to many problems. And what is the problem? Here are squares and triangles or rectangles and linear particles that cannot overlap each other. For example, that can represent chimers or different molecules as model particles. But the bottleneck of these problems is the difficulty of calculating entropy. Because it cannot be exactly calculated for any arbitrary density in most of the problems. This is the work we are addressing. We have addressed for many years, and we call this problem also multi-site occupation in the language of absorption community. But as a statistical mechanics problem is a very interesting one, as we will see on the talk. And we wanted to address the best calculation of the entropy of this problem, the free energy and the thermodynamic properties. And we were inspired, in fact, by the works of Bilsek, Haldane, and Wu, who postulated the existence many years ago of quantum particles or quasi-particles, which are neither bosons or fermions, but something in between, and also put forward the statistic of those particles who nowadays are called anyons and are very interesting from the practical point of view because of the quantum computing is a potential quantum computing gates. But what is the core of the problem here? That the particles on a lattice in a system has many states possible, but any particle that occupies one state, it will exclude, not like fermions, it will exclude a number of states, which depend on the size of the particle structure and the topology of the lattice. This concept is very crucial, it's very important, because the exclusion of states is characterized by a statistical exclusion parameter. It means the number of states that particle excludes from the set of the state that the particle has in the lattice or in the system. And well, if we go on with this idea, which resembles the ideas in quantum mechanics of quasi-particles, but we move to the domain of classical statistical mechanics. So we can develop the simple formalism of the canonical ensemble, which is as simple as powerful here, as we will see. This is a partition function in a canonical ensemble for n particles in a homogeneous field.
That's only me who don't hear, or you also?
I think the internet of Professor
So in some other state to the other particles. And this is the configurational factor. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I
now.
don't have a internet speed as good as I would like.
Now it is okay. Okay.
If something happens, I will switch to the cell data. And this is the counting of a state of the configuration, which contains a factor here. We will depend on n. This, of course, interpolates between the statistical of boson and fermions, will allow us to describe a large set of systems in which exclusion phenomena affect the thermodynamic, because it affects the entropy of the system in a crucial way. So this is the dn is the number of a state of the nth molecule has in the system of volume B before n minus 1 particles already occupy this volume. And this relation here, dn, is the number of total state that a particle has as isolated particle on the system, on the lattice, minus the number of states that have been taken off from this total for the previous particles already included in the volume B. This is the fundamental relation. And these numbers, because of the correlation, is dependent on n. Well, from here on, we can move and calculate the free energy, and of course, develop all the formalism of the thermodynamics. If we know the free energy, we can calculate the chemical potential in terms of n, which is the number of particles per state, which is proportional to the density. So from that hypothesis that in an structured particle, it will exclude more state than the one it occupies, we can move directly to the density dependence of the chemical potential. And of course, here is the interaction with the external field or the absorption field. So in this relation, we have the exclusion effect and this cumulative function in its derivative, which is basically how many states are excluded per particle were included in the system in a very general way. These terms will have a very precise physical meaning, as we will see later. Here, n is the number of particles per state, and all the tilde functions are the limiting values of the Gn divided by the number of states in the thermodynamic limit. So I will move on. This is what we call fractional statistical theory of absorption, because it's an extension of the fractional quantum statistic of Haldane, Vilcek, and Boole of the quantum domain to the statistical, classical statistical mechanics domain. But we can take the simplest assumption. That means that the number of states that a given particle excludes to the other particles from the set of states is a constant G. It's a number, it's a constant G. So we can easily calculate and see the G0 tilde will be G times n. the derivative will only be G, as we assume, and we go on to the chemical, the density depends of the chemical potential, which is called the absorption isotherm in the absorption community. But this is a general relation. And of course, this will be exact for the one-dimensional case of occlusion. If we take a one-dimensional lattice and take a particle like a Kepler, which will exclude the number of sides equal to the size of the Kepler, this will lead us directly to the exact result of the one-dimensional case of Kepler on a lattice, a straight Kepler, of course, which is obvious in one dimension. In the language of solution absorption, this in the logarithmic fashion lead us to a very simple equation where the G parameter G, the statistical parameter G, will characterize the exclusion of the particle. It will be strongly related to the size of the particle and the topology, size and structure of the particle and the topology of the lattice. So we have a strong thermodynamic statistical mechanics framework to address a large set of problems in which exclusions is present. Theta here is related to the number of particles per state in a lattice in a very direct way. So we can put everything in terms of the coverage, the lattice coverage, in terms of the concentration of the solution, or in terms of the chemical potential of the gas phase, if we are talking about a gas phase equilibrium with the absorb phase. G has a precise physical meaning, as I said, and we will see in the next slide how can we move forward to consider the correlation that operate in the lattice. Here, somehow we have assumed that all the states, all the lattices, are excluded by a particle by an amount of G, but the set of states that are being excluded are independent one of each other. So is it the underlying assumption of this formalism up to here, because of the way the counting of the states and the counting of configuration we had proposed before. But we will now move on. We took a step forward, because if we look in any problem of a structural particles on a lattice, if we look at dimers here on this lattice, we can see an isolated dimers not only occupy one state of the possible state, which is these two sides are occupied, and this is the configuration of the dimer on the lattice, but all the dashed states are excluded from being occupied by other particles. But
you have some 4 minutes more, please.
I'm sorry?
You have some 4 minutes more.
4 minutes, okay. But there is multiple exclusion in the lattice in the problem. In the problem, there can be two particles that exclude one single state. And these multiple exclusions is what makes the problem so difficult to deal with. And we have considered it in a recent work by Julian Ricardo last year, a counting answer to deal with the correlation, with the topological correlation that occurs when the multiple exclusion, which is what really happens in a lattice when the structural particle is put on a lattice and we want to calculate the thermodynamic properties. So this answer is very powerful. It's an answer on the set of the state that are being occupied by the particles. The particles, the end particles, the n, will have the state that the n minus 1 particles had minus the state that the particle has occupied, plus a number of states which are being excluded because of the topological correlation by a constant GC, which will characterize all the correlations. This is a kind of mean field approximation in the space of states, and it will lead us directly to a new distribution, a new statistical distribution, which will contain, of course, the Bose statistic, the Fermi-Dirac statistic, the Bose-Einstein statistic, and also the Boole statistic when correlations are absent, where no correlation at all are on the lattice. It will mean the total independent state, one from each other. So I want to stress something very interesting here before going to some results. Here's the absorption isotherm, which came from the formalins, but we were able to define a spectrum function, which means the number of states per particle excluded per particle in the system. This is a spectrum function which turns out to be a very simple relationship of the thermodynamic measurable quantities. This is basically 1 over the densities as well over the chemical potential. So for the first time, we can characterize in a system of topological correlation of particles, we can characterize the exclusion, which is information about the configuration of the particle on the lattice related to the topology of the lattice, to quantities that can be experimental measured. It will open a whole possibility of studying absorption in another system where this entropic exclusion operates. So this is a new statistical distribution where it contains the quantum, the well-known quantum statistical distributions, and also the Wu distribution for the independent state for any ions.
Probably go to conclusions because you have 1 minute more.
Okay, I have 1 minute. Thank you very much. We have checked and we have compared with this model and this proposal with Monte Carlo simulation for Kmers, linear molecules, size 2, 4, 6, and honeycomb and square lattice. And we will see that is a very, very strong and robust thermodynamic description of such structured particles. And also, it is to be very powerful to describe absorption of model proteins, which are model like rectangles on the surface for many protein surface system. Here we compare the Lewis model, which is a more basic model in terms of the statistic of the states, and the Monte Carlo simulation, and the blue line is the FTA results predictions, which we will see work very much better, and it will do even better if we add the correlation between the states. I don't want to go right now over this for the shortness of time. And
we're running now out of time.
At the end,
your time is finished.
Yeah,
your time is finished.
Conclusions, just 2 seconds. This provides a very powerful framework to describe the absorption thermodynamic of structured particles. In fact, for the problem of the structured particles, statistical problem of particles on the lattice. And topological correlation can now be accounted through the recently developed multiple exclusion statistic. And so this can be, this provides us a robust framework to study this complex statistical mechanics system and its application. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this talk. Thank you.
I want to thank the organizers.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we do not have time for questions. All time is used. Maybe if there is some short questions, otherwise the question can be written in the chat. Is there any short question? I put one. You started from objects of different size. You showed that dimers, trimers,
yes,
squares, and so on. And
yes,
then you start to speaking about homogeneous systems when all objects are the same. Probably you can use your approach also using heterogeneous systems with different objects.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, yes, of course. This can be formally can be generalized to the mixture, of course. Is directly generalized to the mixture of objects, of course, as you say, as you point out. Yes, of course. So
thank you.
We are developing this point right now.
So now it is right time to start last session of MECO45, and I have a pleasure to ask Haim Taitelbaum from Bar-Ilan University, Israel, to present his talk. You are welcome, Haim.
Okay, so again, I'm here on this window, but I speak on another window. Following the previous keynote talk, I will now speak about real spreading, which is thin film spreading, and I'll talk about bulk and precursor non-universal dynamics. The outline of my talk is the following. First, I'll give you some backgrounds which reflects my motivation in this field, dealing with reactive wetting in room and high temperatures, focusing on the topic of kinetic roughening, and we as statistical physicists always look for universality. Then I will speak about my motivation in thin film spreading, both bulk and precursor dynamics, which is the main topic of my talk. And then I will show you some results of non-universal and non-monotonic behavior. The background. These are pictures of experiments done in reactive wetting. By reactive wetting, I mean that we put some droplet of mercury on top of glass. So you see AG spreading on AG on glass. And these are the pictures when we look through the microscope on top view of the advancing droplet. You see here that in the beginning, in the first times, we see clear perimeter, then we see how it roughens. Interestingly enough, also in high temperatures, in hundreds of Celsius degrees, there were experiments of reactive wetting about completely different metals, like SN spreading on 1 microns AU coated, and the results are similar. These add up to a whole series of such patterns of kinetic roughening in nature, and this is a collection of pictures that I have seen in a conference just several weeks ago by David Brutin, and he shows all these nice collections. Now, we as physicists would like to see or to characterize the behavior of kinetic roughening. How we do that? If we look on top view of these advancing interfaces, we define 2 times, and we see the interface running from T1 to T2, different heights of the interface, and we characterize or define the width. The width of this interface is simply the second moment, which reflects the fluctuations of this height as a function of time. And Family and Vicek, about 30 years ago already, they assumed that we can try to see that the width behaves in a scaling law of a gross t to the power some power beta in earlier times, which represents the gross, And then after some times, the growth does not grow anymore, but the details of the interface become more fine, and then you can write a scaling law of the L, the length of the system, as some power alpha. So from the earlier times, you get the power law governed by beta. At later times, it does not grow, but from this you can extract alpha. This is the basis for defining alpha as the roughness exponent and beta as the growth exponent. And of course, one can ask whether these exponents are universal, whether the relations between the exponents are universal, and there are a variety of results of interfaces in the literature back some decades ago. In our case, what was interesting to us is to see whether there is universality of the kinetic roughening as far as reactive wetting is concerned. So we compared the results of room temperature in our lab of mercury on silver, which is room temperature, to the results of high temperatures. And after doing some dimensionless comparison, we indeed verified that there is universality and we got the same behavior. In a more quantitative comparison, we had some interesting conclusions about the sets of exponents alpha and beta. The results are summarized here. I will not go into the details, but the bottom line is that these exponents are not material dependent. However, they are thickness dependent, because what happens in these systems is that the thickness of the substrate plays a significant role in the dynamic behavior. So this paper that I quote here of both our groups reflects the comparison. Now, with this background in mind, we've looked in a lattice gas model suggested by Abraham about almost 20 years ago. And here there's a very simple model where we have a substrate, which is just a grid. And on top of the substrate, we have two layers. One is the precursor film, which is the particles that run from the droplet reservoir, they spread to the right. On top of them, we have a supernatant layer, which is what is called the bulk. And they are spreading to the right according to Hamiltonian, which is written in the bottom. And this Hamiltonian has two main parameters. One is the parameter J, which is just the nearest neighbor interaction, representing the surface tension and the collective motion of the particles. And the other is A, which is the Hamaker constant, which reflects the interaction with the substrate. As you can see, J runs over all nearest neighbor interactions, and A is 1 over z to the third, where z has two values, 1 and 2, for the only two layers that exist in the system. Now, when we start to run the system, we use what is called the Kawasaki, the kinetic Monte Carlo in the Kawasaki dynamics version, where we have a transition between states and particles exchange their positions according to the Hamiltonian and the temperature. So this is the main transition probability that drives the system. What we get is the following. In the beginning, figure A, we see very, very slow spreading to the right. Now here we start to see, you see the gray, the tiny gray pieces. Until the system starts to be more effective, it takes several thousands of steps. And we see here on the gray, the spreading of the precursor. We see on the bulk the spreading of the bulk, which is the upper layer. And we have to define the interface. You see here the blue for the precursor and the red for the bulk. And this is reminds us of the kinetic roughening that I spoke before. Now, in order to complete the characterizations, we have to recall what are the rules of dynamics of classical wetting. Classical wetting, there are several results of how does the radius of such droplets or films grow. So there is the famous Tanner's law, which says that the radius grows very, very slowly, is t to the 1/10. Lopez added gravitation, and he got T to the 110. Molecular kinetic theory got T to the 17. And Davidovich added some thermal fluctuations, and he got T to the 16. All of these are very, very small motion as compared, for example, to diffusion. However, Dejean in 1985, he analyzed the precursor behavior, and he said that the precursor moves qualitatively much faster, and the precursor does move as T to the 1/2 very fast compared with the others. So we ran our systems and we start to look at the exponent. What we did is keeping J, the nearest neighbor interactions, keeping it fixed as J equals 1. And we changed the temperature, as you can see here. And here we plot the results as a function of A of the Haim-Taitelbaum constant. These are the results for the radius exponent. On the left, you see the results for the bulk. On the right, you see the results for the precursor. Now, immediately at the first glance, we see that the results are not universal. Namely, for each set in the parameter space, we get different radius exponent, different T to the something, T to the delta, we call it here. In the bulk, this is the picture. In the precursor, this is the picture. And in the bulk, we see that not only it is not universal, but also non-monotonic in some region where A is close to 1, and there is a competition between the nearest neighbor interaction, J equals 1, where the particles tend to be close to one another and they don't want to move, to A, which is the Haim-Taitelbaum constant, where the substrate drags the film to spread. So the result of this competition is that at this parameter range, we can see here the maximum curve. The lines here with the different colors are simply the lines of the classical results of Davidovich and Lopez and Tanner, which means that our system covers all the known results in a single unit model. In a recent work, which is now under refereeing process, we played also with various J, not only various A, but also various J in these Hamiltonian. And here we came to the conclusion that there is a clear distinction between small j, which means not nearest neighbor interaction at all. The particles are free and they're affected only by the A, the Haim-Taitelbaum constant, and the large j. So you see here the small j are in the blue, the large j are in the black, and there is a borderline j, which is j to the 1/2. Interestingly enough, if we increase j more than these parameters, the system simply is stuck because the interaction is so strong that it does not allow the system to move despite the attraction to the substrate. This is a reminiscence of some transitions that were quoted in the literature about spreading and non-spreading transition. So we can see here, still in this very, very simple model, similar behavior we get for the precursor, distinction between the lower j, the higher j, and the borderline j. These are the results for the radius exponent, for the advancement, for the distance. Now we go to the fluctuations. The fluctuations are the gross exponent. We did the similar analysis. We see here the beta exponent, which reflects the size of the fluctuations. As I've shown you before, the scheme, the fluctuations of the interface as it looks from a top view. So we see here again a non-universal behavior, both for the bulk and also for the precursor, which reflects the effect of the different parameters, only 2 parameters on the system. Our motivation for this research is that in the original paper by Abraham, at least according to what they reported a single set of the parameters and reported only this point, the blue here, and the green here, as seemingly as if they are universal. Our work shows that they are not universal, and these points are just a sample from a very more richer behavior of this simple system. In the next slide, it shows it even further. we plotted the result for the gross exponent for this beta exponent of the kinetic roughening for various J, for various nearest neighbor interactions as a function of the ratio between these two parameters of the Hamiltonian, the A and the J. So we can clearly see two sides. On one side, one of the parameters wins. In the other side, the other parameter wins. And in between, in the middle, where both are of order 1, I would say, very rough statement, but more or less it's okay. When both are of order 1, the fluctuations of the interface are the highest, which is quite intuitively to interpret physically, but now we got the results for that. So in summary, I've given you some background of top view reactive wetting, with discussing kinetic roughening in general. Then we spoke about bulk and spreading, bulk and precursor thin film dynamics. If you want to read more on this latest work, so this is the work non-universal dynamics exponent for thin film spreading, and as I told you, another one which completes it is now under a referring process. And if you want to read more about the background of kinetic roughening in these wetting problems, this is the list. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your talk. That's not very often that during MECO conferences we have experimental talks results presented. It's very particular and very nice. Thank you very much. So the talk is open for discussions. Are there any questions? So while people are thinking, I put you the question. When you spoke at the beginning about reactive vetting systems and about universality, and you showed us experimental results and convinced us that exponents do not depend on material, yeah, but they depend on width.
Yes.
And somehow I thought that it'll be about say two-dimensional, three-dimensional crossover. But then I thought your two-layer model, and in fact, what kind of widths do you mean when you say exponents depend on widths?
Okay, the similar thing between the first part of my talk and the second part of my talk is the fact that the substrate is not infinite. Namely, that you have effects of the surface of the substrate. In the experimental works, all these experiments were done where you have an upper metal. In the room temperature, it is the liquid mercury on top of a silver film, which has a thickness. And this is on top of a glass, so it has a finite thickness. Mm-hmm. And if I play with the thickness, I get different exponents because the distance to the glass where the system strives to go down to the glass where the energy is minimal, so it plays an effect. In this model in the second part of the talk for the thin film spreading, the thickness is simply constant, but it is very, very, very finite and small. So in this sense, they are similar. It's not, of course, the same thing, but the idea is that you don't have an infinite or semi-infinite layer where something can happen, but it is fine.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? So if it is no questions, if it is not the case, so thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I wish I could be in Cluj, but someone interrupted the plans.
We would wish that too.
At least the speaker, the chairman of this session, and the organizers are in the same time zone, you know.
Yes.
So next talk, we have even 2 minutes in advance. Reinhard, you can start.
So I am here, yeah. I tried to start.
So the next talk will be given by Reinhard from Johannes Kepler University in Linz, Austria. And it will be about Middle European comparison in statistical physics. Historical overview. You are very welcome, Reinhard, and we are all looking forward
Yes, so let me welcome you at the end of this video conference, which was also the first one of this type for me. It was an adventure. And let me thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share my memories and the research on the beginning and evolving of the MECO meetings with you. This is an ongoing project where you see the people which contribute here on my first transparency. So almost 50 years ago, on 12th of September 1970, Van Hove closed the Battle Colloquium in Geneva on critical phenomena with an after-dinner address under the title, The Changing Face of Physics. I think this also fits to describe what one sees when looking at the history of the MECO meetings. There are now methods of face recognition, and I would say that Eliza Merglot gave some examples for MECO in her teaser of the poster session. I mean, these measurements of the scientific work is very interesting and ongoing in now the community. We have heard a lot of things also at this MECO. There are, according to the historian Reinhard, 3 leading historiographic themes: how scientific knowledge has been made, and how knowledge has been made scientific, and how it has been moved, and how making and moving scientific knowledge have been understood together. This talk should a little bit contribute to this. Now, we also had speakers at the former MECO meetings like Eugene Stanley and Barabasi, who also contributed very recently to this topic with papers like Science of Science, where Stanley was a co-author, and The Census of Physics, where Barabasi was a co-author. And this new analysis extends the classical work of the Solar Prize, which analyzed the face of the physics. I report here my own memories and conclusions, and if possible, these were checked by references. Not always I had access to this, and if you have any comment on this, you can go to the email I show on my transparencies. I report here my own memories. And when the MECO was beginning, or the time before MECO could begin, Europe was separated in 2 parts by the so-called Iron Curtain. It also cuts the academic network, which already existed within the extension of the Habsburg Empire. And this is shown, it was before the war in 1910, let's say, and it is shown in this, indicated in this yellow frame. Of course, this old network was also strongly connected to the other European countries at that time. The Iron Curtain is a little bit thinner in the southern part between Austria and Yugoslavia. It was not a physical boundary. It was open in the sense that I was there at that time, that the border was in the middle of a street where you could go and where you could drink wine at some houses. So this was a different. The Iron Curtain changed also the communication between the scientists. And here I have a citation from the Conference on Statistical Mechanics in Amsterdam in 1973. It's the Van der Waals conference, When it became clear that Professor Voronel was unlikely to be allowed to attend this conference in person to present his paper, the suggestion was made that the paper would be read for him. It was an important paper because he measured an important exponent, namely the specific heat exponent at the liquid gas phase transition, which showed that you have a divergence in this quantity, and you could compare with the three-dimensional Ising model. Let me note, as early as the mid-1950s, the Rockefeller Foundation suggested Austria to set up a supranational scientific organization which should prepare the experience from the history of the Habsburg monarchy for emergence and decay, performance and failure of a multinational empire, for planning and acting in the present and future. The history of the Habsburg monarchy should serve as a model case for the functioning and supranational structures in Europe. The initiative for this project should be done by the Minister of Education, Trimmel with the name 1952, and indeed soon after the signing of the Austrian State Treaty, the first semi-official contact began in mid-1955 from Austria scientists to colleagues in Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, and Poland. The Minister of Education responsible for these agendas supported this establishing of more contacts, so to speak, through the Iron Curtain. The University of Vienna, and here the physics department, played an important role in the academic landscape of the Habsburg Empire. Thus, it is comprehensible that it could take over the initiative for such a connection between Budapest, Bratislava, and Vienna. First step to establishing these contacts through the Iron Curtain were done in 1964. One of the pioneers of this collaboration, Professor Walter Thierring at the Institute of Physics in Vienna University, informed me, wrote Yurij, informed me that his father, Professor Hans Thierring, at that time disposed with money from Ford Foundation, and he used it for financial supporting of contacts with East European states. And these contacts led to what is known in Austria and also in these countries as the Triangle Seminar, and it took place in June 1st, 1968 in Bratislava. But there were further activities namely European activities to found a European Physical Society. And its geographical extension is shown here on this map. And this European Physical Society, despite social and political unrest, was founded in September 26, 1968. 62 physicists, communities gathered in Geneva to found the European EPS. Among these were the official representative of national physical societies of 18 countries of both Eastern and Western Europe. At this time, it was one of the first international scientific institutions that was especially European, and at the same time transcended the Cold War political divide. And it was founded at a dramatic historical moment, only 1 month after the armed invasion of Czechoslovakia by 5 countries of the Warsaw Pact. Now I come to the point, how did these people, these scientists, came together? And I start in the year 1967 where an interesting paper appeared about the dispersion in second sound and anomalous heat conduction. It was a paper which is known nowadays as the United Nations paper. It is a paper with Farrell, Reinhard, Schmidt, Schwabel, and Cefalucci, and it was a collaboration between Farrell from the United States, Cefalucci and Reinhard from Hungary, Schmidt from Germany, and Schwabel from Austria. It was an important paper because it dealt with the dynamical critical behavior at the super fluid phase transition, and it had an immediately reaction by Halperin and Hohenberg, which extrapolated this paper to other dynamical systems. But these correlations were rare examples. Another example was the Milosevic from Serbia, from Belgrade, who made his thesis in the United States, and his supervisor was Eugene Stanley. Now, a further meeting and possibility to make contact was in the year 1970 at the Varenna Summer School on critical phenomena. The Varenna Summer School was an old school. It was not a school of the European Physical Society. It was long ago established in Italy. And you see here a large picture of the participants there. And I have marked the name of these participants which are connected to the MECO. In bold are people which were at the first MECO meeting. In red are people which are at the advisory board. And for other people, I have noted where they have participated at the MECO in the following year. The topic of the MECO was very important for the critical science, because it was a paper where Kadanoff presented and Fischer presented the status of critical static, and Jona Lasinio and Di Castro were there. You see them here beside Kadanoff, and they presented their paper on the connection between critical phenomena and universal scaling and field theory, which is known, which came from such another side. Let me mention that also Jona Lasinio contributed at the Patel colloquium, which I mentioned in the beginning. But Binder also participating there. He reminds Jona Lasinio's lecture, although some lectures on mathematical aspects of the renormalization group were given by Giovanni Lasinio, is remained obscured, at least for me, how this ever could help to understand critical phenomenon. Only a year later, the papers by Kenneth Wilson provided a breakthrough in understanding, and thus the proceedings volume of this famous summer school unfortunately became outdated already when it appeared in print. So there was a discussion about the development and beginning of the renormalization group theory in critical phenomena. I don't want to go into the details. I only want to cite Patashinsky, which also was at one MECO meeting. He, together with Pokrovsky made important improvements before Wilson and are mentioned by the Nobel Prize Committee. But Patashinsky said, for the field theory, I would say the formulation of Di Castro and Jona Lasinho is perfect. They had not calculated exponents, but the scheme is a closed one. Now, there was another school, namely the NATO Advanced Study Institute, had the school on structural phase transitions in 1971. And there, under the participants and speakers were Linz from Yugoslavia, Schneider from Switzerland, Cowley from Scotland, Great Britain, Müller from Switzerland, Valenta from Austria, and some other people, Shireni, Schneider, Thomas, and Szabo, which also made contributions at later MECO conferences. 10 years later, it was described what was the highlight of this school. Namely, at Yale School, 1981, they noted at the first Yale School the report of a central peak in the fluctuation spectrum of strontium titanate close to its 106 Kelvin structural phase transition, demonstrated that the simple soft mode theory of such transition was incomplete. The missing ingredient was the essential nonlinearity of the system. But I would like to note that this problem, a dynamical problem, how does the central peak appear? The theory of soft mode should involve it in some sense, and the theory of phase transition. These were the themes of the oncoming MECO. Then, some 2 years later, another Varena school was there, and it was on the local properties at phase transitions. You see, it was a school where you had a combination of theoreticians and experimentalists dealing with this problem. And I again show you the participants with names which you already have seen: Müller, Blinz, Frankus, and then new Rigamonti, Kurtens, and so on. All of these people contributed later also to the MECO conference. And I would like to point also to one participant from Romania. It was Coltea. Unfortunately, there were no more informations, but I think he was also from Cluj. But I would like to have some note on this. Now, all these schools contributed to the possibility that connections between scientists could be made. There was also another meeting on structural phase transitions where I could participate. It was in the year where I could finish my physical thesis. You see a picture out of the time here, and you see some other contributors. Again, they were participants of the MECO, and again, the central peak and the structural phase transition was the topic. Now, in the year 1973, there was, in fact, a zeros meeting, as Raj told me. This meeting, he told me, was to prepare the first official MECO, so to say, and after Cephalougis's return from America to Hungary, his activity was centered about the dynamical realization group. And in the years when the end of the Cold War belonged to the realm of a fantasy, Peter Cefalusi strove to establish and maintain international scientific contact. So he was one of the drivers of MECO. He played an instrumental role, as you can read in a publication in 1992. And in order to prepare this, Zoltán Rás told me it was Peter Cefalusi who had the idea that we should organize a meeting with the critical phenomena people, as he said, of the neighboring Middle European countries. The first question was to settle what was the Middle European. And we have heard in the impressive talk of Csaba Szabó on Monday on variants of the definition, but there are more different definitions, and let us hear what they did. And Raj told me, after some discussion, we decided that there was the Middle European Cup in soccer, and we shall consider these countries which participate at this cup. And here you see the picture, this map of the Middle European Cup, the Mitropa Cup of the years 1927 to 1940, and it revived in 1950. And you see Switzerland, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Yugoslavia, and Italy. So Rás was sent to another Varena school on history and physics, which was organized by Jona Lasinho, to invite him to this Zero MECO meeting, but he couldn't come, and he sent two students, Benetin and Stella, and Milosevic from Serbia took place also at the meeting. I just want to mention that Benetin and Stella, they are known from a paper which was published just in the same year on the easing model. They showed that the magnetization who tried easing to calculate by the derivative of the free energy is the same as the magnetization which was calculated by Young from the correlation function. So it was also a very important paper in critical statics problems. So unfortunately, I do not know who took part from Vienna at this meeting, but I could imagine it was Valenta who organized the MECO meeting in Vienna. Now, before the meeting in the year, there was another conference. It was one of the European Physical Society conferences on ferroelectricity. And there, a large amount of people from the Eastern countries took place. Also, Shuvalov, for instance, from the USSR, and other people, Dvorak from Czechoslovakia, they all are also participants of the upcoming MECO meeting. Now, in the year 1974, the first MECO meeting could take place. It was announced in the Europhysics news, the paper where conferences are announced by the European Physical Society. And there already the name, the first Middle European Cooperation International Meeting was announced. Not so in the provisional program, which I got when I took part of this at this conference. There it was only an international seminar by the cooperation of a group of scientists, primarily from Middle European. Now, what was the topic of this conference? I only can tell you the names of the speakers. So Thiering had a keynote lecture. Then we had talks by Müller, Shapiro, one unknown, I could not read the name in the handwritten notes, Schwabel, Enz, Blinz, Bielis, Shuvalov, Francus, then Iona Lasinio, De Castro, Cephalugi, Konstantinovic, Milosevic, Novakovic, Binder, and Schneider. And those connected by red lines or by the frames were already had paper where they cooperated and published common scientific results. So this first conference, at least from the speaker side, had speakers from USA, USSR, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, Hungary, and Yugoslavia. So at that time, I state a fundamental question in the theory of meta concerns the nature of different phases and transitions between them. And this was the general topic. And the specific topic at this meeting were the soft modes, the central peak, non-classical exponents, neutron scattering, paramagnetic resonance measurements, computer calculations, critical slowing down, and static and dynamic randomization group theory. So at this first MECO meeting, you had the three topics in physical science: the experimental part, the theoretical analytical part, and already the new numerical part with Monte Carlo and molecular dynamic calculations, here by Binder and Schneider presented. Now, I do not know what was the keynote lecture by Thiering, but I could imagine, since he had a lecture about the exact results on the structure of matter, that this was something he reported, because it was also the theme of his science research in later time. And what I want to note, that at this he already heard Kenneth Wilson, who was in Austria at the International University Weeks for Nuclear Science held in Schladming, and he had a talk, but he did not publish in the proceedings. Now, what I also could imagine, that he would have commented on the history in statistical physics of the University of Vienna. But what I show here is from a paper of Montrol 10 years later, where he defined the Vienna School of Statistical Thought. It's in fact a network, a directed network of person-to-person connections, which we heard today. It's the connection between supervisor and students. And if we look at the latest time, you see here, for instance, Schwabel. And if, like a squirrel, we go in this tree from these leaves back to the another limb of the tree, you could come to Farrell in the United States. And also we have Binder here, which studied in Vienna at the Technical University, and he is on a limb also connected to this tree. I cannot go into the details, it would be too much time, but I want to note only that also Galavotti and De Castro had a contact to this tree via a student, Tuschek. In the Nazi time, he lived undercover in Germany in the flat of Wilhelm Lenz, you know, who had the student Ernst Ising. And Tuschek created the Italian collider in Frascati, and De Castro learned from him statistical physics, where Tuschek used the textbook of Erwin Schrödinger. And I also want to note that Erwin Schrödinger was the first who coined the name ferroelectricity. Now, you see the organization of MECO worked very nice, and I would like, in the short time I have, just to tell you what is a speciality. So it was planned each year changing the side of the Iron Curtain for the meeting place. All participants should be in one location, and it was then about 100 reached, for instance, in MECO3 already. Free stay for at least participants from the eastern side, eventually support of travel expenses, and mainly we had participants from the so-called MECO centers. I come to this point below. No proceedings should be made, and it was we had invited talks just only at the first MECO meeting, but then immediately contributed talks, and in MECO 1977, we had the first poster sessions. I mean, this was an upcoming at that time at international conferences. And what was also very important, that there was always a meeting where the different groups reported about research plans and topics for future research and exchange and so on. So now let me browse through the meetings. Now I start with the first meetings, and we could go only in the first step to Germany in Regensburg, then back to Yugoslavia, then Switzerland, and then at the first time we crossed the Iron Current going to Poland. We had an advisory committee, and here you see persons of the first advisory committee. And it was the case that when in every meeting we had an increase of the advisory board by including one from the organization committee of the new MECO. So now in the next meetings, also crossing in yellow, always we cross the Iron Curtain, but we could not reach a zigzag. Only after the 10th conference, we could reach really a zigzag, each year a change through the Iron Curtain. And then at MECO 17, we came together from Hungary in Germany at Duisburg, and in 1991. And there at this MECO meeting, the next two MECO meetings were planned. It took place at March 1991, and it was planned to meet again in 1992 in Beograd, and in 1993 it was planned to meet in Greece. So you see from the dates on the end of March, 14 days after the end of MECO meeting, the Yugoslavian war began, and the plans to meet in Beograd were destroyed. Now, so we had 3 years interruption, and I remember that in 1990, it was, I think, 1993, I was asked if I could organize the next MECO meeting. That was too early, and I said, well, I need 2 years. And at this meeting, I think it was with Sepfalusi, Schwabel, and Schurder, and there Schurder said, I can organize it in Smolenice in 1994. And then at 1994, in MECO 19, a restart of the 1 year MECO meetings started again. And unfortunately, Milja, who was at the MECO a long time and also in the advisory board, could not organize in the following the MECO in Greece. And here you see a map where all these meetings have taken place. And you see that in some countries we had more and more meetings, and you see how it extended to the east, to Ukraine. I mean, you see not only the scientific problems changed, but also the political landscape of Europe changed. And we can come back to what we think of the Middle European region. I mean, as it was in the talk on Monday, you see here the longitude of the two towns, namely Lviv and Cluj, where we have the middle of Europe. Now, the MECO meetings, the phase of the MECO changed over the time, and at MECO 43, this was noted in the booklet where I have, and the themes of the MECO, statistical MECO, condensed matter, soft matter, active matter, quantum many-body systems, and quantum information, and so on, was named. And this year, they say there are many contributions of interdisciplinary applications, as we also have heard in this meeting, and it was enclosed finance, social science, complex system, biophysics, and information theory. And I want to show you how this, in one example, took place at different MECO meetings. I start with Binder, who had a talk at MECO 4, 1977, phase transitions in systems with disorder. Then there was a talk at MECO 6 on systems with quenched random impurities in spin classes. Then Condor talked about fluctuations and chaos in Ising spin classes, and at MECO 16. And in year 20,000, at MECO 25, Condor again spoke about spin classes, but effects in finance. And at MECO 43, we had Pouchot talking about statistical physics in economics and finance. And you see how the MECO went with the common phase of physics, which broadened in their interaction between different disciplines, and the phase picture of MECO showed this again. And I cite Sherrington, who was also at MECO 20. The scientific journey of discovery has been highly interdisciplinary, and there is much more scope in many directions. And I hope we will see that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Reinhard. Thank you very much for this nice talk. And we in statistical physics community better know Reinhard Wolk because of his seminal contributions in critical dynamics, in theory of magnetic liquids, in theory of disordered systems. But recently, many of us enjoy his papers in history of science and in history of culture. And now we had this very, very nice talk. So and also thanking you, maybe you all allow me to thank, in having Reinhard with us here, to thank him and all those due to efforts of whom the MECO was created and the MECO continued, and we have MECO 45 already now. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, I see.
I'm Andrea Gambassi.
Yeah, I know you.
Okay, so
welcome.
Thank you. So very interesting talk. I have a question, which is sort of more diplomatical. I mean, from the experience that Trieste had with ICTP, where in principle people from the East and from the West, they could talk freely about science. I mean, in Trieste, it is well known that during the Iron Curtain period, among participants, sometimes there were people who were clearly not physicists. And probably they were sent by governments to spy. Did something similar ever happen, or there was any impression that this could have happened in the MECO conferences?
No, but I mean, and that's my own experience. So I've been through the time of the MECO meetings in the Eastern countries, in different Eastern countries, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and East Germany. And I could see a different behavior of the participants from this country a little bit. For instance, what I remember, and I would like to share this with you, when I was in Poland, I think it was MECO 4 or 5, Pataszyński was at the meeting. He was from Novosibirsk, and we had a lot of a lot of vodka, and he was at the piano and playing. I mean, he was a good player, and we all saying, "Oh, when the saints go marching in," and something. So there are different memories of these MECOs, and these also show the different political systems, in my opinion, which was in the country. But I always had with physicists, which I communicated, a very nice experience and friendship. So on the other hand, I know from conferences and from invitations we had to people from the Soviet Union. I mean, the citation of the Van der Waals conference I made at the beginning, Wolowik could have letters from Michael Fisher, and the KBG came to his house and told him, "Why do you have so many letters from Fisher?" And he said, "Well, I do not know." And then they showed him the letters. He could look at them, and he said, "Well, he was interested in my science." And so you see, these are stories which are told from Eastern countries. You can find it at the internet. There was a well, if you write me something, I can give you a.
Yeah, okay, sure, I will do. Yes, yes.
It's
in Trieste, they were spies from West and East checking each other. I mean, it was sort of bizarre. And it was sort of known that now and then there were strange participants who clearly knew nothing about physics, but they were admitted. You know.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. But it was...
Are there some other questions?
I have a question, not really a question, a comment, if I may.
Yes, please.
So we had an intention, Reinhard, thank you very much, a really excellent talk, as ever. We had an intention to present to Mariana Krasnicka. I don't know if Mariana is with us at the moment tonight, but because Mariana and her friends in Lviv have created an excellent website for the history of MECO, basically the archives of MECO. And we were planning to present some flowers to say thank you, which of course we can't really do quite yet. So if Mariana is there, and actually to all of the Lviv guys, eventually at some future MECO, when we can meet in person, we will present you with flowers and beer and everything, and chocolate and all these sorts of things to say thank you for this excellent website. Maybe I don't know if I can share. I don't know if I can share my screen. Maybe not. Let's see. There's the website is there if you can see it. I don't know. It's under MECO Conference Physics. So if you Google for MECO Conference Physics, you will find it. And also there is a MECO page on Wikipedia, which of course people can contribute to in the tradition of Wikipedia.
Thank you very much for this. Yeah, and what I want to say is that these two sites, they are made by MECO participants for MECO participants. Each of you can contribute to these sites. For example, in Wikipedia, it is written that MECO45 will occur in Cluj-Napoca. Now you can write there that it had happened, and the next participant will write his information. So smoothly we are passing to the last item of agenda.
Yuri, I would like to make just a comment because I am the last speaker. And I think I can make this comment in the name of all the participants of the conference. I would like to thank the organizers for this. Well, for me, really, it's a fantastic thing to have a face-to-screen conference instead of a face-to-face. And well, it was very interesting, and especially also the 3 contributions about your country. And I really also, I want to see these things in reality. So thank you very much for the good organization. I never thought that it's so unproblematic with these digital computers. Well, so thank you very much for organizing, and I wish MECO a new time which has a face-to-face meeting in future. Okay, thank you, Sultan.
What I was going to say is that we are going to pass to the last item of agenda, which is closing. And I have a suggestion. I think Zoltan will allow us to do this. Could we all still keeping our microphones muted? So the one who is speaking will make the microphone on. But let us run our cameras, at least those of us who want who are able to do this. Because I think it will not take a lot of traffic, but we will have an, yeah, thank you. Yeah, also I want to add my thanks to the organizers. It was excellent. I think I will share common opinions that it was very professional, very smooth, and all was organized, I would say, with great taste. Choosing the presentations about your region, about your country, choosing scientific presentations, choosing oral topics, all, I mean, even our discussions during breaks, it was the feeling that we all are together. And I wrote these names. So far, I don't know how to pronounce all of them properly. But on behalf of all of us, I want to thank Zoltan, Hajnalka, Shandor, Maria, Ferenc, Zolt, Bulchu, Zuza, Levente. I am sorry for my mistakes, but already your country and your science, it is closer also to us. And usually at the end of MECO meetings, we have 2 items. And then also, if some people want to say more, you are very welcome to continue. One item is to give, of course, the word to the organizer, to Zoltan. And another item to give the word to the organizer of future MECO, which is still the secret for you, but afterwards you will know. So I pass the stage to Zoltan. You're welcome, Zoltan.
Thank you very much, Jurko, and thank you very much, Professor Falk, for this wonderful historical presentation. I am really sorry that this was the first time that MECO should have been organized in Romania, and we couldn't do it only online. So, of course, any on-site meeting has the advantage of socialization and getting new friends, and we tried it 2 times. So we tried to reprogram it in September, but we saw that it's not possible yet in September. And I think that choosing the online conference was good in the sense not to destroy the continuity of MECO. So that was a forced situation. We had to do it something like that. And thank you all of you that you participated. I know that many of you don't like this form of conferences. I would prefer also other forms of conferences, on-site meetings, but this was this year, so we had to go it on this way. Also, I would like to add some things to what Professor Falk told us. Is exactly that was the scope of MECO, from going and making a link between East and West. And I think MECO was the most successful conference in this sense. So my first conference ever I participated, it was a MECO conference right after the curtain was down in Romania. That was a conference I could go to Sopron, near Sopron. And that was my first ever conference, physics conference that I could attend. And many of us from East had to thank this idea of making this conversation between East and West possible. Also, maybe we have to add that the scientist you mentioned, Professor Falk, and you wanted to ask whether we know who it is. It's Professor Kolja, who is definitely from Cluj, from the Bar-Ilan University, and he was my supervisor. So you see the link.
So you see the person-to-person
exactly
is working.
This is what I want to say, that these links are going on person to person. And it's really a nice thing to see this how the ideas are spreading and how the schools are surviving during the times. Let me also tell you some final organizatoric things. We had a competition, poster competition, and the journal Entropy was kind enough to offer a prize, so for the best poster prize. And what we have chosen to show this prize was to make an online voting. And we realized this online voting, and maybe Reinhard could tell us and show us the chart that was the result of the voting. So she quickly made a chart. You see, this is the chart without names now. And you see that we have a winner. So this is the 30.2% person. He is Maxim Dudka from Ukraine, and we congratulate him, and we'll pass his name to the Entropy journal, and then he will also, we have here the certificate also, perfect. And the prize will be given by them, and they have to make an understanding how Maxim could get and get this prize. And finally, let me also thank, as already Jurko did, to my organization team here. So usually, as in science always, there is other people's behind the results that you see. And this happens many times in science. We know that there's those peoples we never see. And those are the ones who contributed most to the success of a scientific paper or a scientific work. So first of all, here, all the work, the big part of the work was done by Reinhard Dimain. Maybe she could open her video. I would be glad to let you all meet her. Let me just say a few words. She's not from physics. She's from the linguistic department of the Bar-Ilan University, and she's just finishing her PhD. And she was kind enough to take over all these jobs, and I think it was a great thing that she did. She responded, for me at least, excellently, always when we asked her something to do. So she's the main hero of this conference, I think. And after that, a lot of part of the work was done here by a colleague of us who is not here, is Zsuzsa Sárközi. And she was the one who did this abstract booklet. And she came up with the idea together with another colleague of us to make it in a clickable format, so to be too easy to handle it also. And then a lot of work was done by Yurij Szabó Ferenc, who was responsible for the homepage. They are all colleagues of mine at the physics department, all professors, and most of them, in fact, all of them working in the field of complex systems. So Yurij Szabó Ferenc was the one who was in charge of the homepage. Levente Szabó was the one who was charged for the technical details. So he has a PhD in physics, but his background is computer science, and that is what is a suitable job for him. And then Sándor Bulcs, who was my second help here, always backupping me and always helping us with all the ideas. And a lot of thanks goes to Zsolt Lázár and Mária Ercsei Ravasz, who was in charge of reviewing the abstracts and proposing us the contributed talks, and also a big help we got from Borbély Sándor, a colleague of us. So thank you all of you being here with us. And It was a great pleasure hosting you. And now maybe, Jurko, you can give the words to the next organizer. And hopefully next year it will not be an exception and we will meet on site.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Zoltan. So I encouraged you to contribute to MECO site. So Ralph told us that there are two MECO sites. One is on Wikipedia page, one is historical one, and you can give new information to both places. And also I encourage you to contribute to future MECOs. If some of you want to organize MECO in your country, you are very welcome to contact the editorial board, the advisory board. Usually the decision is between 1 and 2 years in advance. So already now we know the host of the next MECO, who will have a word just after me. And now we are discussing the host for the MECO in the year 2022. And you all are welcome to contribute to future MECOs, not only by your contributions, but also by organization. And now I have a pleasure to announce you that some time ago, we agreed and we are thankful to the future organizer of MECO, who is Eugenis Kaupuš, who is from Technical University of Riga. And now Eugenis, he is with us now, and you are welcome to tell us several words about future MECO in Riga.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we do.
We see you, we hear you.
Yes, I'm Eugenis Kaupuš, as already announced, from Latvia, and MECO never has been up to now organized in Latvia. Therefore, we came some time ago to idea to organize it in Latvia, and I agree to take this effort as an organizer. And also, of course, I have already some people who will help me to organize the next MECO in Riga Technical University. Presumably, this will be in some hotel near campus of Riga Technical University, but this is not definitely known up to now. First, we need to define dates, and then we can make some reservations for this MECO meeting. Our idea was that we can organize, or at least to try organize MECO as usual, face-to-face meeting, maybe in May, but we should discuss this probably during board meeting tomorrow, when exactly. Then, okay, and in a case if the situation is still bad with COVID and so on, then of course we will have an option to make also online conference. So thank you for your attention. Then see next week, next year in Riga, hopefully.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you for your work you have already started for MECO46. Either face-to-face or face-to-screen, but anyway, it will occur in Riga. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Maybe somebody else wants to say something? If not,
well,
maybe I just want to thank you, Jurko, for chairing this last session, and hopefully we will meet again, all of us, for the next MECO meetings again. So
and this occasion, thanks to all chairmen and to all speakers at this conference too.
Thank you.
And thanks, big thanks to Zoltan. Goodbye to all.
Thank you. Goodbye to you.